The day my daughter said she wouldn't attend my wedding, the air in the room turned so still I could hear the refrigerator humming. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She just folded her arms across her chest and said very quietly, "If you marry him, Mom, don't expect me to be there." For a moment, I thought I had misheard her. At 65, your hearing isn't what it used to be. But this wasn't my ears failing me. It was my heart stumbling over something it never expected to face again. My own child, standing between me and the small, fragile happiness I had found after years of believing that chapter of my life was already closed. I remember gripping the edge of the kitchen counter to steady myself. The granite felt cold beneath my palm. "Leela," I said gently, "this isn't a sudden decision. You've known Arthur for almost a year." She gave a short, humorless laugh. Knowing someone isn't the same as marrying them. Behind her, the kettle began to whistle. Neither of us moved to turn it off. "You're 65, she continued, her voice tightening. "Why do you even need this? Isn't companionship enough? Why complicate everything now? Complicate." Such a heavy word for something that had brought light back into my quiet little house. I turned off the stove and poured the water into 2 cups, though my hands trembled enough that a few drops spilled onto the counter. "You used to tell me you wanted me to be happy," I said. "I meant comfortable, safe, not making reckless decisions." Reckless? I almost smiled at that. At 22, I had married her father with nothing but a second-hand dress and a borrowed pair of shoes. That had been reckless. What this was felt deliberate, thoughtful, gentle, but Leela was staring at me as if I were a stranger. And in that moment, I understood something with a quiet ache. Children grow up believing their parents belong to a finished story. They forget we are still living one. For nearly 14 years, my life had moved at the pace of a ticking clock, predictable, orderly, quiet. My husband, Astrid, passed away on a cool October morning after a brief illness that none of us had fully prepared for. One day we were discussing what to plant in the spring garden, and the next I was choosing a casket. Grief does not arrive like a storm, not always. Sometimes it seeps in slowly like winter through the cracks of an old window. After the funeral, people brought casseroles. They spoke in softened voices, then gradually they returned to their own lives. Leela had wanted me to move in with her family. "You shouldn't be alone," she insisted. But I wasn't ready to surrender the house Astrid and I had built together, the crooked bookshelf he swore he would fix, the wind chimes that only sang during autumn, the faint scent of his cedar aftershave that lingered in the closet long after his coats were gone. So I stayed, and I learned something surprising. Loneliness is loud at first, then it becomes familiar. My mornings began with tea by the window. Afternoons were for tending roses or volunteering at the local library twice a week. Evenings meant television murmuring softly while I knitted scarves no one had asked for. It wasn't an unhappy life, just smaller than before. Leela visited often in those early years. She worried in the way daughters do, checking the expiration dates in my refrigerator, rearranging my medicine cabinet, suggesting brighter light bulbs as though illumination alone could keep sadness away. But life pulled her forward. A husband, 2 energetic boys, a demanding job, visits became monthly. Then every other month, I never complained. That is one quiet lesson widowhood teaches you. People love you, but they cannot pause their lives to sit inside your silence. So I made peace with mine. Until the Tuesday afternoon I met Arthur Caldwell. It was raining, one of those steady, thoughtful rains that makes the world smell clean again. I was at the library circulation desk when he approached, holding a book as if it were something fragile. "You have a leak," he said politely, pointing toward a small drip near the window. "I know," I replied with a sigh. "Maintenance knows too. We're all pretending it adds character." He smiled then, not broadly, not flirtatiously, just a small, warm lift at the corner of his mouth. "I suppose every old building earns the right to creak a little." There was something about his voice, calm, unhurried. We spoke for only a minute before he left, but I found myself noticing when he returned the following week and the week after that. Arthur was 72, a retired high school history teacher, widowed like me. At first, our conversations stayed safely within the boundaries of weather and literature. Then one afternoon he said, almost shyly, "Would you care to join me for coffee, strictly as 2 people who have both read too many books?" I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to go, but because wanting something new felt like a quiet betrayal of the life I had already lived. Still, I heard myself say yes. The cafe smelled of cinnamon and fresh bread. Rain tapped gently against the windows as we talked for nearly 2 hours, about travel we never took, about spouses we still missed, about the strange freedom of growing older. There was no spark, no dramatic flutter, just ease. And sometimes ease is far more powerful. Months passed. We began walking together on Sunday mornings. He brought me cuttings from his garden. I sent him home with lemon loaf wrapped in parchment. He never tried to replace Astrid, never spoke as though love were something that could be duplicated. Instead, he treated it like a new language we were both learning slowly, careful not to mispronounce anything sacred. The first time he held my hand, it was simply to steady me on an uneven sidewalk, yet neither of us let go immediately. By spring, my house no longer felt quite so quiet. Then one evening, as dusk softened the edges of everything, Arthur sat across from me at the dining table and said, "I know we are no longer young, but what would you think about spending whatever years remain together?" No grand speech, no kneeling, just sincerity resting gently between us. And to my own surprise, I didn't feel fear, I felt peace. When I told Leela about the engagement 2 weeks later, she went very still. At first, I mistook it for surprise. Now, standing in my kitchen as she refused to attend the wedding, I realized it had been something else entirely. Disapproval. "Mom," she said again, her voice softer but firmer than before, "people our age aren't supposed to start over like this. Our age." I almost asked when exactly the world had decided my story was finished. Instead, I looked at my daughter, the baby I once rocked through fevers, the teenager whose heartbreak I soothed, the woman I believed would always wish me joy. "Tell me what you're really afraid of," I said quietly. Her eyes flickered for just a second, but she didn't answer. And that was the moment I understood this wasn't only about my marriage. There was something else beneath her resistance, something she wasn't yet ready to tell me. That night after Leela left, I did not turn on the television. Silence felt more honest. The house settled around me, the faint creak near the hallway, the soft ticking of the clock Astrid and I bought during our 25th anniversary trip to Vermont, the whisper of wind brushing against the gutters. I sat at the kitchen table long after my tea had gone cold. When your child is small, you learn the language of their cries, hunger, fear, exhaustion. But when they become adults, their silence becomes harder to translate. Something was wrong, not the ordinary kind of worry daughters carry about aging parents. This was sharper, almost defensive. I replayed the conversation in my mind, searching for the moment her expression changed. The tightening around her mouth, the way she avoided Arthur's name, how quickly she had moved from surprise to refusal. It felt less like concern and more like opposition. Arthur called just as I was rinsing my cup. His voice, warm and steady as always, slipped gently into the quiet. "How did it go?" I considered softening the truth, but love at our age has little patience for pretense. "She says she won't come to the wedding." He was silent for a moment, not startled, not offended, simply absorbing the information the way he absorbed most things, thoughtfully. "That must hurt," he said. "It does," I admitted. "But what troubles me more is that she wouldn't tell me why." Another pause. Then carefully he asked, "Do you want me to speak with her?" "No," the answer came faster than I expected. "This is something she needs to say to me when she's ready." Arthur understood boundaries in a way many people never learn. He did not insist. Instead, he said something that settled softly inside my chest. "Families take time to adjust to new happiness, especially when they believed your life was already decided. Decided, such a strange word for a future that still stretched ahead of me. After we hung up, I walked through the house, turning off unnecessary lights, lingering briefly in each room. For years, I had been the quiet widow, dependable, predictable. Perhaps Leela had grown comfortable with that version of me. People adjust to your solitude more easily than they adjust to your transformation. The following Sunday, Leela invited me to dinner. Her invitations had become less frequent over the past few years, so I accepted immediately, though I suspected this was not a casual gathering. The moment I stepped inside her home, I sensed the careful order she had imposed on the evening. The table was already set. Roast chicken rested beneath a foil tent. Even the boys, usually thunderous in their movements, were unusually subdued. Children notice tension long before adults acknowledge it. My son-in-law Mark kissed my cheek. "It's good to see you, Elaine. Good, not warm, but kind." Mark was a practical man, an accountant, the sort who believed problems could be solved with enough columns and patience. We sat down, plates were passed, water poured. For several minutes, conversation hovered safely around school projects and neighborhood construction. Then Leela placed her fork down with deliberate care. "Mom, have you set a date?" There it was. "Early October," I said. "Small ceremony, just close friends and family." Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "You're moving very quickly." I folded my napkin across my lap. "Arthur and I are not young, Leela. When you reach this stage of life, you stop postponing joy." Mark cleared his throat gently. "How long have you known him now?" "Almost a year and a half." "That's not very long," Leela said. I met her gaze. "It's long enough to recognize kindness and steadiness." She hesitated, then asked the question that shifted the entire room. "Has he talked to you about his finances?" For a moment, I thought I had misunderstood. My finances. I repeated, "Yes, his savings, his house, his will." Mark murmured her name in quiet warning, but she continued. "You have assets, Mom. The house alone is worth a great deal now. You need to protect yourself." Protect, the word stung more than it should have. "Are you worried about me?" I asked slowly, "or about my estate?" Color rose in her cheeks. "That's not fair." "No," I said gently, "but it is an honest question." Arthur had never once asked about my savings. In fact, when the subject arose months earlier, he had waved it away with almost old-fashioned dignity. "What's yours remains yours. What's mine remains mine. At our age, companionship is the wealth." So why was my daughter speaking as if I were walking blindly into danger? "I just don't want you being taken advantage of," she insisted. "And what makes you think I am?" She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Mark intervened softly. "Leela worries, that's all. But worry usually comes wrapped in tenderness." This felt edged. The boys began arguing quietly about dessert, and the spell broke just enough for conversation to drift elsewhere. Yet the question lingered between us like smoke. Finances, inheritance, protection, words that did not belong anywhere near the simple joy Arthur and I had built. When I rose to leave, Leela walked me to the door. For a moment, I saw the little girl she used to be, the one who clung to my coat on her first day of school. "Mom," she said, her voice lower now, "promise me you'll think this through." "I have thought it through." She shook her head. "No, I mean really think about it." I studied her face. Fear lived there, but beneath it something else flickered, something almost like resentment. A few days later, I mentioned the conversation to my friend Nora during our weekly walk. Nora had the rare gift of listening without rushing to conclusions. She asked about his money. Nora said, eyebrows lifting. "Yes. And has Arthur given you any reason to doubt him?" "None." She considered this. "Then perhaps the issue isn't Arthur." The thought settled heavily. That evening I opened the drawer where I kept important documents, insurance papers, the deed, Astrid's old watch, not because I distrusted Arthur, but because Leela's questions had planted a small, stubborn seed. I realized something then. My daughter had never asked about my financial plans before, not once in 14 years. So why now? Why him? Why this marriage? Later that night, as I prepared for bed, my phone chimed. A message from Leela. "We need to talk again, just us." "No, Arthur." I stared at the screen, a slow unease spreading through my chest. Children do not guard their words so carefully unless they are holding something difficult behind them. I typed back, "Of course, come for tea tomorrow." Her reply came quickly. "There's something you deserve to know." I slept very little that night, because deep down, I felt that whatever she was about to tell me would change the shape of everything I believed was waiting ahead. Leela arrived the next afternoon precisely at 4. She has always been punctual. Even as a child, she would sit by the door with her little shoes already tied, afraid of being late for places that did not require such urgency. When I opened the door, I noticed immediately that she wasn't wearing makeup. That alone told me this conversation mattered to her. Leela never left the house without at least a touch of lipstick. She stepped inside, glanced around as if reacquainting herself with the rooms, and removed her coat slowly. "I can't stay long," she said. "You should never begin serious conversations with a time limit," I replied gently. "They have a way of ignoring schedules." For a second her mouth softened, almost a smile, but it vanished quickly. I led her to the sitting room where late sunlight stretched across the hardwood floor. Dust floated lazily in the golden beams. The smell of chamomile drifted up from the 2 cups I had prepared. She did not touch hers. Instead, she clasped her hands together so tightly that her knuckles blanched. "There's no easy way to say this," she began. I sat opposite her, folding my hands in my lap to keep them from fidgeting. "Then say it plainly." She inhaled slowly. Arthur Caldwell is not who you think he is. The words did not land like thunder, they landed quietly but with weight. I waited. At least, she added, that's what I'm afraid of. Afraid, I repeated, not certain. She hesitated. Then came the first crack in her composure. 2 weeks ago, I was having lunch with a client downtown. An older woman overheard me mentioning your engagement. I suppose I said Arthur's name louder than I realized. A pause. She asked me if he used to teach history at Brookfield High. Yes, I said carefully. My heartbeat had begun to slow into something deliberate, attentive. And then she told me, Leela continued, her voice tightening, that her sister dated him years ago after his wife died. I blinked. That isn't a crime, Leela. No, but what she said next unsettled me. Outside, a car passed slowly, tires whispering against the pavement. She claimed he moved very quickly with her sister, talked about marriage within months. Then, when her sister refused to merge their finances, he ended the relationship almost overnight. I considered this. Did you ask her sister directly? No, I didn't even get her name. It all happened so fast. I let out a quiet breath. So, a stranger told you a second-hand story about a relationship from years ago? Yes, but, Leela, I interrupted gently, do you hear how fragile that sounds? Her eyes flashed. You think I'm inventing reasons to dislike him. I think you are searching for them. She leaned forward. Wouldn't you rather be cautious than naive? The word stung more than she intended, I suspect. I have lived 65 years, I said softly. Naivete is no longer one of my habits. Silence stretched between us. Then she said something that shifted the ground beneath the conversation. Have you run a background check? I almost laughed, not out of mockery but disbelief. No, you should. Marriage is not a corporate hire. Her voice rose slightly. Mom, older women are targeted all the time, especially widows with property. There it was again, property, assets, protection. I studied my daughter carefully now, noticing the tension in her shoulders, the quick rhythm of her breathing. Fear can make people sound accusatory when they are only trying to shield what they love, but something still didn't fit. You've always trusted my judgment, I said. This is different. How? She hesitated, and in that hesitation, truth hovered. Then she whispered, because this affects more than just you. The room grew very quiet. I spoke slowly. Explain that. She looked down at her hands. The house, your savings, Mom, that is part of our family's future too. Ah, there it was. Not greed, no, Leela was not a greedy woman, but security, expectation. For 14 years my life had followed a predictable arc: grow older, remain alone, eventually leave behind what Astrid and I built. A second marriage redraws those lines. You believe Arthur threatens that future, I said. I believe marriage changes things legally, she replied quickly. Even with prenups, complications happen. Her practicality would have impressed me if it didn't feel so painfully transactional. Leela, I said quietly, are you afraid of losing me or losing what I might leave behind? Her head snapped up. That's unfair, is it? Tears sprang into her eyes, sudden bright. You don't understand, she whispered. Then help me. For a long moment she said nothing. When she finally spoke, her voice sounded younger than I had heard it in years. After Dad died, I worried about you constantly. Every late-night phone call terrified me. Every time you didn't answer, I imagined the worst. My chest softened. I know. And now, just when I finally felt certain you were safe, her voice broke slightly. You're changing everything again. Changing everything? Such a revealing phrase. Children do not realize that watching us remain frozen in grief can become a comfort to them, proof that the world is still arranged as they remember it. I am still your mother, I said gently. Marriage will not erase that. But it shifts priorities, she insisted. It always does. I thought of Arthur, the way he listened, the quiet patience in his gestures, how he never rushed my memories of Astrid. Nothing about loving him felt like abandonment. Have you considered, I asked softly, that your resistance might not be about Arthur at all, but about the idea that my life continues forward? Her lips parted, closed, then opened again. That's not it. But she did not sound certain. We sat in silence until the sunlight slipped lower and the room cooled. Finally, she stood. I just need you to be careful. I am. She picked up her coat, then paused at the door. If you insist on going through with this, at least promise me one thing. What is it? Ask him for a prenuptial agreement. The word fell between us like a stone into still water. Arthur and I had never spoken of such things. Our relationship had grown in a space untouched by negotiation, Yet suddenly, practicality had entered the room. "I'll think about it," I said. It was the only honest answer I could offer. After she left, I remained by the door for a long time. Not because I believed Arthur was deceiving me, but because doubt, once planted, rarely stays small. That evening when Arthur called, I almost pretended everything was fine. Almost. But love, especially later in life, deserves transparency. So I told him what Leela had said. He listened without interruption. When I finished, he was quiet for several seconds. Then he said very calmly, "If signing a prenuptial agreement gives your daughter peace, I will do it without hesitation." Relief washed through me, swift and unexpected. "You're not offended?" "No," he replied gently. At our age, love is not proven by shared bank accounts. It is proven by how carefully we protect one another's dignity. I closed my eyes briefly. In that moment, my trust in him deepened. Yet as I hung up the phone, another thought unsettled me. If Arthur was willing, even gracious, about such precautions, then why did Leela still seem so certain that something was wrong? And why did her fear feel less like caution and more like certainty waiting for proof? 2 nights later, I received a phone call that made my stomach drop. It was Nora. Her voice was unusually tight. "Elaine, I don't want to alarm you, but I saw something today that I think you should know." My grip tightened on the receiver. "What is it?" "I was at the bank this morning," she said slowly, "and I could swear I saw Leela speaking with Arthur in the parking lot. I went very still. They didn't see me," Nora continued, "but it didn't look like a friendly conversation." A chill slid down my spine. Because Leela had promised me she would not approach him. And suddenly, one quiet question rose above all the others. What had my daughter already said to the man I was about to marry? For several minutes after hanging up with Nora, I remained seated at the edge of my bed, the phone still resting in my hand. The house was quiet except for the steady ticking of the hallway clock, a sound I had once found comforting. That night, it felt almost intrusive, as though time itself were urging me toward something I was not ready to face. Leela had promised she would not interfere. She had looked me directly in the eye when she said it. Yet now I pictured her standing in that bank parking lot with Arthur, speaking about matters that belonged first and foremost to me. I did not sleep well. Questions have a way of rearranging your thoughts long after midnight. By morning, I had convinced myself there must be a simple explanation. Perhaps she had run into him by chance. Our town was not so large that encounters were impossible. Still, when Arthur called later that day, I heard something unfamiliar beneath his usual warmth, a carefulness, not distance, but restraint. After we exchanged the small comforts of routine conversation, I decided not to circle the subject. "Nora saw you yesterday," I said gently, "at the bank with Leela." There was a brief pause, then he sighed softly. "I wondered if she might mention it to you." My chest tightened. "So you did speak?" "Yes," he did not rush to explain, and that steadiness reassured me even as my curiosity sharpened. "What did she want?" Arthur chose his words with the same deliberate care he used when discussing history, as though each sentence deserved balance. "She asked me about my intentions." I closed my eyes briefly. "And what did you tell her?" "The truth," he said. "That my intention is to build a peaceful life with you, nothing more complicated than that." A warmth spread through me, but it was threaded with unease. "She also asked about my finances," he added quietly. I could almost see Leela, posture straight, questions precise, determined to extract certainty from a man she barely knew. "Were you upset?" I asked. "No," he replied. "Protectiveness is not a flaw in a daughter," though her manner suggested she had already reached a conclusion. My fingers traced the grain of the kitchen table. "Did she accuse you of something?" Another pause, then gently, she asked whether I had ever pursued relationships for financial security. The bluntness of it made my breath catch. "And what did you say?" I told her that after 40 years of teaching, modesty has been my closest companion. I have my pension, my home, and enough saved to avoid becoming a burden to anyone. That sounded exactly like Arthur, dignified without pride. She mentioned a story she'd heard, he continued. "About a woman I dated long ago." My pulse quickened. "So it's true?" "Yes," he said calmly. "I cared for someone briefly about 8 years after my wife passed, but we discovered we wanted different futures. There was no deception, only incompatibility." Relief brushed through me, yet something still tugged at my thoughts. "Arthur, why didn't you tell me about her?" "I would have," he replied, "if our past had wandered into our present, but it ended quietly, and I have never believed every closed door requires revisiting. His answer felt honest, not evasive. Still, secrets, even harmless ones, can cast long shadows when uncovered by someone else. I'm sorry she approached you, I said. Please don't be, he answered softly. Families rarely welcome change without first testing it. There was a gentleness in his voice that made my throat tighten. Then he added something that stilled me. She asked me to reconsider marrying you. The words seemed to echo in the room. What? She believes the marriage would disrupt your family's stability. A strange mixture of hurt and disbelief settled over me. She had no right. I told her the decision belongs to you, he said firmly but without anger. I inhaled slowly, steadying myself. Did she say anything else? He hesitated only briefly. Yes. She asked whether I would sign a prenuptial agreement. I almost smiled despite the tension. And I told her I would sign whatever allowed you to feel secure. Emotion pressed unexpectedly behind my ribs. Kindness, especially when challenged, reveals a person's character more clearly than charm ever can. After we hung up, I sat very still. I was not angry, not yet, but a boundary had been crossed, and it needed tending. I called Leela that evening. Come by tomorrow, I said quietly. We need to talk. She arrived looking wary, as though she already sensed the direction of the conversation. We sat at the same kitchen table where she had first declared she wouldn't attend the wedding. I spoke with Arthur, I began. A flicker passed across her face. So you know, yes, what I don't know is why you felt entitled to question him behind my back. Her shoulders stiffened. I wasn't behind your back, I was protecting you. Protection does not require secrecy. She exhaled sharply. You would have stopped me, I would have asked you to trust me. Silence stretched between us, then she said more quietly, did he tell you everything? I believe so. Her gaze searched mine almost urgently. Mom, people can appear gentle and still carry motives you don't see. And daughters can carry fears they don't fully understand, I replied. The words hung there. For a moment, I saw uncertainty ripple through her confidence. Then something shifted, not defensiveness this time, but vulnerability. When Dad died, she said softly, it felt like the ground disappeared. You were all I had anchoring that part of my life. My heart softened. You still have me. But this marriage, she struggled for the right words. It feels like watching our family change shape without my consent. Ah, there it was again, not greed, not suspicion alone. Loss. Children rarely anticipate that their parents might outgrow the roles assigned to them. I am not replacing your father, I said gently. I know that logically, she whispered, but emotions are rarely logical. We sat quietly, letting the truth breathe. After a moment, I reached across the table and covered her hand with mine. Leela, happiness is not a resource that runs out. My loving Arthur does not reduce how I love you. Tears filled her eyes, but she blinked them back. I just wish you had found someone younger, less complicated. I couldn't help a small smile. At 65, everyone is complicated. To my relief, the corner of her mouth lifted slightly. Then she grew serious again. Will you at least promise me you'll formalize the finances? A prenup, separate accounts, all of it. Yes, I said. Arthur already agreed. That seemed to steady her more than anything else had. But as she rose to leave, she paused. There's one more thing, she said. My stomach tightened faintly. What is it? I hired someone. The words landed quietly but with unmistakable gravity. A private investigator. For a moment, I could only stare at her. You did what? I needed certainty, she said quickly. He's preparing a report. Shock moved through me, not loud, not explosive, but deep. You investigated the man I love without telling me. I did it for you. No, I said softly. You did it because you could not tolerate uncertainty. She flinched. The room fell into a heavy silence neither of us seemed able to lift. When will you get the report? I asked finally. Soon. After she left, I stood at the window long after her car disappeared. Part of me wanted to call Arthur immediately. Another part hesitated. Because investigations, once begun, have a way of uncovering things, harmless or otherwise, that cannot be unseen. 3 days later, Leela called. Her voice was tight. The report came in, my heart slowed, deliberate as a drum, and she swallowed. Mom, we need to talk tonight. There was something in her tone I had never heard before, not suspicion, not protectiveness, something heavier. Something that made the quiet house feel suddenly unfamiliar. As I set down the phone, only one thought circled my mind. What truth was about to step into the light, and would it pull Arthur closer to me or farther away than I had ever imagined? I did not turn on the lights while I waited for Leela. Dusk has always been an honest hour, the time when shapes soften and the world seems to hold its breath between what was and what will be. I sat by the living room window, watching the last band of pale gold slip behind the maple trees. When headlights finally curved into the driveway, my chest tightened without permission. Leela stepped inside carrying a slim manila envelope. She did not remove her coat. That was the first sign this conversation would not be gentle. Neither of us spoke as she placed the envelope on the coffee table between us. It looked harmless enough, just paper and glue, yet the weight of it seemed to tilt the entire room. "Before you open it," she said quietly, "I need you to understand something. I didn't want to be right." I studied her face. There was no triumph there, only dread. With careful fingers, I slid the documents free. At first glance, the report was disappointingly ordinary: employment history, property records, confirmation of Arthur's pension, the deed to his modest colonial house on Hawthorne Street. Everything aligned with what he had told me. My shoulders loosened slightly. Then I turned the page. Civil filing 12 years ago. My eyes paused on a name I did not recognize. Margaret Ellis versus Arthur Caldwell, a lawsuit. The word pulsed quietly on the page. "What is this?" I asked. Leela's voice was low. "She sued him. For what?" "Financial coercion." The phrase felt clinical yet unsettling. I read the summary twice before the meaning fully arranged itself. Margaret Ellis had alleged that Arthur pressured her into selling her home and combining their savings shortly before their planned wedding. According to the filing, she later withdrew from the arrangement, claiming she felt manipulated. The case had been dismissed. No judgment, no admission of wrongdoing, but the existence of it stirred something fragile inside me. "Dismissed," I said slowly, "which means it wasn't proven." "Yes," Leela replied, "but cases don't appear out of nowhere, Mom." I kept reading: depositions, affidavits. Legal language stripped of emotion. Margaret ultimately withdrew her complaint, citing emotional strain and a desire to avoid prolonged litigation. No settlement, no charges, still a story lived beneath those sterile paragraphs. And now it was sitting in my living room. "Did you know about her?" Leela asked carefully. "He mentioned someone he dated years after his wife died," I said. "He described it as brief." "This doesn't sound brief." "No," I admitted. The quiet stretched. Outside, a branch tapped softly against the siding. For the first time since Arthur proposed, doubt did not feel like an abstract possibility. It felt present, not loud, not decisive, but present. "What do you want me to do with this information?" I asked finally. "I want you to slow down," she said. "Postpone the wedding." "Ask him directly?" I closed the folder and rested my palm over it. 14 years ago, when Astrid became ill, I learned something about fear. It grows quickly in the absence of clarity. And clarity, I realized now, could only come from one place: Arthur. "I will speak with him," I said. Relief flickered across her face, followed quickly by something else: guilt, perhaps. "I know this hurts," she whispered. "It does," I said honestly, "but not in the way you think." She frowned. "It hurts because I wish you had trusted me enough to share your fears before hiring strangers to examine the man I love." Tears filled her eyes instantly. "I was afraid you'd refuse." "I might have," I said gently, "but we would have faced it together." She nodded, unable to argue. As she rose to leave, she touched my shoulder, a small gesture that carried the weight of the child she once was. "Whatever happens," she said, "I just want you safe." After the door closed, I remained very still. Then, with hands steadier than I expected, I reached for my phone. Arthur answered on the second ring. "Elaine," he said warmly. The sound of his voice almost undid me. "Can you come by?" I asked. "Tonight?" He did not hesitate, of course. When he arrived, the night had settled fully. I opened the door before he could knock. One look at my face and his expression shifted, not alarmed but attentive. "What's wrong?" I gestured toward the living room. We sat opposite each other, the manila folder between us like an uninvited guest. "I want you to read this," I said quietly. He adjusted his glasses and began turning the pages. I watched him carefully, the small crease forming between his brows, the slow inhale, the pause when he reached Margaret's name. He did not rush. When he finished, he closed the folder and rested both hands on it. Then he looked at me. I wondered if this might surface someday. There was no defensiveness in his voice, only acceptance. "Tell me," I said softly, and he did. Margaret and I met at a charity lecture, he began. She was intelligent, lively, recently divorced. We kept each other company for nearly 2 years. 2 years, not brief, but not a lifetime either. We spoke of marriage, he continued. At that stage of life, practical conversations naturally follow: where to live, how to manage 2 households. I suggested selling both homes and purchasing one together. That sounds reasonable, I said. It was meant to be, but Margaret grew uneasy. She worried about losing her independence. He paused. I never intended to pressure her, yet in hindsight I may have spoken too confidently about what I believed was logical. And the lawsuit. His gaze dropped briefly to his hands. She filed it after ending the engagement. I was stunned, hurt, but more than anything, confused. Did you coerce her? No, he said firmly, but I failed to see how frightened she had become. Logic can feel like force when someone is already uncertain. The distinction settled quietly between us. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. He met my eyes. Because it was one of the great sorrows of my later life, not the end of the relationship, but the realization that my good intentions had been experienced as pressure. There is a particular kind of honesty that does not defend itself. It simply stands still and allows you to look. I learned from it, he added, which is why I have been careful, perhaps overly so, never to rush you, never to entangle our finances. And suddenly memories rearranged themselves in my mind. His consistent insistence on separate accounts, his willingness to sign a prenuptial agreement without hesitation, the gentleness with which he approached every shared decision, not secrecy, correction, growth. Why was the case dismissed? I asked. Margaret withdrew it. Her attorney later told mine that she had acted from fear rather than fact. Silence wrapped around us, not heavy now but contemplative. Are you angry? He asked quietly. I considered the question. No, I said at last. But I am reminded that even kind people carry complicated histories. He nodded. As do you, as does your daughter, as does anyone who has lived long enough to love more than once. We sat there, 2 older souls surrounded by the quiet evidence of past lives, mine with Astrid, his with a wife whose photograph still rested on his mantle. After a moment, he spoke again. If this changes how you see me, I will understand. The generosity of that statement moved something deep within me. At 25, love is often possessive. At 65, it learns to open its hands. I reached across the table and covered his fingers with mine. It changes nothing essential, I said. Emotion flickered in his eyes, quickly contained but unmistakable. Yet even as peace began to settle, another realization stirred. Arthur, I said slowly, there is something you should know. He waited. Leela will not easily let this go. He gave a faint, knowing smile. She loves you. Yes, I said, but love can sometimes look like resistance. He squeezed my hand gently. Then we will meet that resistance with patience. I believed him, I truly did, but as he left later that night, one quiet worry lingered. Had this investigation brought us through the worst, or had it merely opened the door to a deeper fracture between my daughter and the life I was choosing? The answer arrived sooner than I expected. 2 mornings later, Leela called again. Her voice sounded strained. Mom, I told Mark about the lawsuit. I closed my eyes briefly, and he thinks the family should talk, all of us together. A family meeting, the phrase alone made my stomach tighten, because such gatherings rarely exist without consequence. When, I asked, Sunday. As I set down the phone, a strange calm washed over me, the kind that sometimes precedes a storm. I had spent much of my life keeping peace within my family. Now, for the first time, I sensed that choosing my own happiness might require me to risk that peace entirely. Sunday arrived wrapped in a pale gray sky, the kind that threatens rain but never quite delivers, as if even the weather could not decide what it wanted. I dressed more carefully than usual, choosing a soft blue sweater Arthur once said reminded him of early spring. Not for him, I told myself, but for courage. Family meetings have a way of returning you to older versions of yourself, the young mother trying to smooth arguments, the wife learning when to speak and when to remain quiet. But that morning, as I drove toward Leela's house, I reminded myself of something simple. I was no longer a woman waiting for permission to live. Mark opened the door with a solemn kindness that immediately told me this gathering carried weight. Arthur's here, he said gently. That surprised me. I thought this was just family. Mark hesitated. He will be if you marry. I stepped inside. Arthur stood near the window, hands loosely clasped, looking neither defensive nor overly formal, simply present. When our eyes met, something in my chest steadied. Leela emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray she clearly had no interest in setting down. Her movements were precise, controlled. Fear often disguises itself as efficiency. We gathered around the dining table, the same one where birthdays had been celebrated, homework supervised, apologies offered and accepted. Now it felt like neutral territory. For a moment no one spoke, then Mark cleared his throat. "I want to begin by saying this isn't an ambush," he said. "It's a conversation." Arthur inclined his head slightly. "I appreciate that." Leela folded her hands together. "We all want what's best for Mom." Arthur responded quietly, "As do I." The calmness of his voice seemed to unsettle her more than anger would have. She turned to him directly. "Did you pressure that woman to sell her home?" There was no preamble. Arthur met her gaze without flinching. "No, did you encourage it strongly?" "I believed it was practical," he replied, "but belief is not the same as force." Mark leaned forward slightly. "Would you consider a prenuptial agreement that fully protects Elaine's assets?" "Already offered," Arthur said. "And separate estates?" Mark continued. "Yes, medical directives remaining with family." Arthur nodded once. "If that is Elaine's wish." Each answer was steady, not rehearsed, simply grounded, yet Leela's shoulders remained tight. "You're very agreeable," she said. Arthur surprised me by smiling faintly. "Age teaches cooperation." For the first time, Mark's expression softened, but Leela was not finished. "What do you actually want from this marriage?" The question hung there, raw, almost childlike beneath its sharp edges. Arthur did not answer immediately. Instead, he glanced toward me, and when he spoke, his voice carried a quiet warmth that seemed to reach every corner of the room. "Companionship," he said. "Conversation at breakfast. Someone to remind me not to oversalt the soup. A hand to hold during ordinary walks." He paused. "And the chance to give your mother the same steadiness she has already given me." The simplicity of it pressed tears unexpectedly behind my eyes. No grand declarations, just life shared. Mark nodded slowly, but Leela looked down at the table. "When Dad died," she said, her voice softer now, "Mom disappeared into grief for years. I learned to live with the idea that our family had already endured its great love story." Her words caught me off guard. "I never meant for my grief to teach you that love only happens once," I said gently. She swallowed. "I think I built my sense of security around that belief." Ah, there it was, not suspicion, not inheritance, certainty. The human heart clings fiercely to what feels permanent, even when permanence is only an illusion. Arthur spoke carefully. "Leela, loving your father shaped who your mother is. Nothing will erase that, least of all me." She looked at him then, really looked, perhaps for the first time without the armor of assumption. "But what if she gets hurt again?" she whispered. The question drifted across the table like fragile glass. Arthur answered without hesitation. "Then I will be hurt as well. That is the risk of loving anyone." Silence followed, not tense this time, but thoughtful. Mark exhaled quietly. "I don't see a threat here," he said at last. "Only two people choosing not to spend their remaining years alone." Leela blinked, surprised. "You're okay with this?" "I'm okay with your mother being happy," he replied. Her gaze moved slowly from him to me. Something in her posture loosened, not surrender, but the beginning of understanding. Then she said something that broke my heart a little. "I think I was afraid there wouldn't be as much room for us anymore." I reached across the table. "There is no limit to the space a heart can hold." Her fingers curled around mine just briefly, but it felt like a bridge forming. After a moment, she looked at Arthur again. "If you ever make her feel small," she said quietly, "you'll answer to me." Arthur's eyes warmed. "I would expect nothing less." A fragile smile touched her mouth. And just like that, the sharpest edge of the afternoon dulled. We spoke for nearly another hour about logistics, the ceremony, even the possibility of the boys walking me down the aisle. When Arthur and I finally rose to leave, Leela followed us to the door. There was hesitation in her expression, then resolve. "Arthur," she said, "yes, I'm sorry I approached you the way I did." "You were protecting someone you love," he replied. "Apologies are unnecessary." She nodded, then after a small pause she added, "I'll come to the wedding." The words were quiet, but they filled the doorway like sunlight. Emotion caught unexpectedly in my throat. I pulled her into an embrace, and for a moment she held me with the same fierce strength she had as a child. On the drive home, my hand rested lightly over Arthur's. Neither of us felt the need to speak much. peace has its own language. Yet life, I have learned, rarely shifts from tension to tranquility without one final test. Mine arrived less than 2 weeks later. I was at the tailor for a minor alteration when my phone rang. Leela, her voice trembled. Mom, are you sitting down? A cold thread slipped through me. Yes, what is it? There's been an accident. The world seemed to narrow. Who? A breath. Arthur. Everything inside me went very still. For a moment I could not feel my hands. The tailor was saying something, asking whether the hem felt comfortable, but her voice had drifted somewhere far beyond my reach. Is he alive? I heard myself ask. Yes, Leela said quickly. He's alive. It was a car accident. They've taken him to St. Andrews. I do not remember leaving the shop. Only the sound of my own heartbeat, slow, heavy, deliberate, as if each beat were reminding me that love always carries the possibility of loss. The drive to the hospital felt endless, though later Leela told me it had taken less than 12 minutes. Hospitals have a particular smell: antiseptic, recycled air, faint coffee from a distant machine, the scent of human fragility. Leela was waiting near the entrance. She wrapped her arms around me the moment she saw me. He's conscious, she whispered. They're running tests. We sat together in the quiet tension of the emergency waiting area, strangers bound by worry, each pretending not to notice the other's fear. After what felt like hours but was likely 20 minutes, a doctor approached. Elaine, I stood so quickly my chair scraped loudly against the floor. He has a broken wrist and several bruised ribs, the doctor said, but no internal bleeding. Frankly, he was very lucky. My knees nearly gave way with relief. Can I see him? Briefly. Arthur looked smaller in the hospital bed, not diminished exactly, but human in a way that stripped away the illusion of sturdiness we often assign to those we lean on. His eyes brightened when he saw me. Well, he said softly, this is not how I hoped to get your undivided attention. A shaky laugh escaped me before I could stop it. I moved carefully to his side, mindful of the wires and monitors. You frightened me, I whispered. I frightened myself, he admitted. A young man ran a red light. I suppose reflexes are not what they once were. I brushed a strand of silver hair from his forehead, an intimate gesture that felt suddenly precious. Leela called me, I said. She arrived before the ambulance, he replied. That surprised me. Later in the hallway, Leela explained. I was only a block away when it happened. I saw the cars and then I saw him. Her voice trembled slightly at the memory. I stayed until they took him inside. Something inside me shifted quietly then. Fear has a way of clarifying the heart, stripping it down to what truly matters. Over the next 2 days, Arthur remained in the hospital for observation, and Leela came every morning, not out of obligation, but with coffee, with updates. With the practical tenderness she usually reserved for her own children. On the third afternoon, I stepped out to speak with a nurse and returned to find them talking softly. Didn't realize how much your mother smiles when she says your name, Arthur was saying. Leela looked embarrassed. She deserves to smile. Yes, he agreed, she does. She noticed me then and straightened slightly, but the guardedness I had grown used to was gone. In its place was something gentler. That evening, as we walked toward the parking lot together, she slipped her arm through mine, a gesture she had not made in years. I was so scared, she confessed quietly. When I saw the crash, all I could think was that if something happened to him, you would be shattered. I squeezed her hand. That is the risk of loving anyone. She nodded slowly. I think I finally understand that now. A breeze lifted her hair, and for a moment she looked very young again. I owe you an apology, she continued. You've already given one. No, not for investigating him, for something deeper. I waited. For assuming your life was supposed to stay small just so mine could feel stable. The honesty of it caught me off guard. Parents spend years learning to let their children grow, I said gently. Sometimes children must learn the same. She gave a faint smile. Arthur is good for you. Emotion rose quietly in my chest. You see it now? I do. Then she surprised me again. If you still want that October wedding, I'd like to help plan it. For a moment, I could not speak. Instead, I pulled her into an embrace beneath the soft amber glow of the parking lot lights, and something that had been tight inside me for months finally loosened. Arthur recovered quickly, slower than his pride preferred, but faster than the doctors predicted. A cast became a brace. Bruises faded into yellow ghosts, and life with its quiet resilience resumed. One evening, about a week before the wedding, Arthur and I sat on the porch watching the sky deepen into violet. "Your daughter has been very kind," he said. "She needed time," I replied. He nodded. "So did I once when my own son married." I turned toward him, surprised. "You've never spoken much about him." Arthur smiled faintly. "We are close now, but there was a season when I struggled to accept that his life no longer revolved around mine." I considered that. Love, I realized, is full of these quiet recalibrations, parents, children, partners, all learning to make room for one another's evolving stories. "Families bend," he said softly. "That is how they avoid breaking." I rested my head lightly against his shoulder. The evening smelled faintly of fallen leaves, peaceful, earned, yet a small thought stirred within me. "Arthur, after the accident, did you ever reconsider the wedding?" He was silent just long enough for me to feel the question settle. "No," he said at last. "If anything, it reminded me that postponing joy is a luxury none of us truly possess." A warmth spread through me, and in that moment I knew with quiet certainty love at 65 is not a lesser love, it is a braver one. Because it chooses connection despite knowing exactly how fragile life can be. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and unexpectedly warm for October. Sunlight spilled through my bedroom curtains, painting the floor in soft gold. As I fastened the simple pearl earrings Astrid had given me decades earlier, I caught my reflection and paused. I did not look like a young bride, but I looked like a woman who had lived and chosen to keep living. When Leela stepped into the room, her eyes filled instantly. "Oh, Mom," she crossed the space quickly and took my hands. "You're beautiful." "So are you," I said, noticing the careful elegance of her dress. She hesitated. "Are you nervous?" "A little," she smiled. "Good. It means it matters." Then more softly she added, "I'm proud of you." The words settled deep, not approval alone, respect. As we prepared to leave, she squeezed my hand. Ready to start the next chapter, I thought of Astrid, of the long quiet years. Of Arthur waiting beneath a canopy of autumn leaves. "Yes," I said, "I am." The garden looked as though it had been holding its breath for us. Arthur had chosen the venue months earlier, a small botanical garden on the edge of town where winding stone paths curved through late-blooming roses and amber chrysanthemums. Nothing extravagant, nothing theatrical, just quiet beauty. White chairs stood in gentle rows beneath a wooden arbor draped in soft ivory fabric. A breeze moved through the leaves with a sound like distant applause. As Leela and I stepped onto the path, I noticed how the sunlight filtered through the branches, scattering gold across the ground. For years after Astrid died, I had believed weddings belonged to the young, to beginnings untouched by loss. But standing there at 65, I understood something differently. Love is not reserved for any age. It simply waits for the heart to open again. The boys walked ahead, trying very hard to behave like solemn escorts, though excitement kept bubbling through their careful expressions. At the end of the aisle stood Arthur. When he saw me, his entire face softened, not with surprise, not with awe, but with a deep, steady recognition that felt more intimate than either. As if he were thinking, "There you are. I wondered when you'd arrive." Halfway down the aisle, I felt Leela's grip tighten slightly around my arm. "You okay?" she whispered. "Yes," I murmured, but emotion was rising in me, not sharp or overwhelming, just full of memory, full of gratitude. Full of the quiet miracle that life had not ended where I once believed it had. When we reached the arbor, Leela kissed my cheek before stepping aside. Arthur took my hands carefully, mindful still of the wrist that had not entirely regained its strength. "You are radiant," he said softly. "And you," I replied, smiling, "are standing exactly where you promised you would." The officiant spoke gently, but I remember very few of the formal words. What I remember is Arthur's voice when he made his vows. "I do not promise you a life free from sorrow," he said. "We are old enough to know such promises cannot be kept, but I promise you steadiness, honesty, patience, and a love that will never ask you to become smaller so that I may feel larger." Tears blurred my vision. When it was my turn, I spoke without notes. "I have loved before," I said quietly, "and I have grieved deeply. For a long time I believed those experiences had closed the door on new beginnings. But you walked into my life without force, only kindness, and reminded me that the heart does not retire simply because the calendar insists it should." Arthur's eyes glistened. "I promise to walk beside you," I continued. "Not ahead, not behind, but beside, for however many ordinary, extraordinary days we are given." The officiant smiled. Then by the love you have chosen and the life experience you both bring to it, I pronounce you husband and wife. The applause felt warm rather than loud, the kind that wraps around you rather than startling you. Arthur leaned forward and kissed me, not urgently, not dramatically, just a quiet sealing of something already deeply known. And in that moment I felt no division between my past and my future, only a gentle continuity, as though every chapter of my life had been leading patiently to this peaceful page. At the reception, laughter replaced ceremony. Mark raised a glass. To courage, he said. Because starting over is never as easy as it looks. The guests murmured in agreement. Then, to my surprise, Leela stood. She held her glass carefully, and for a second I saw nerves flicker across her face, a rare sight for my composed daughter. I'll admit, she began, when Mom first told me she was getting married, I was afraid. A ripple of soft laughter moved through the room. I thought love at 65 meant risk, disruption, change. She glanced toward me, her eyes bright. What I didn't understand was that refusing change is often the greater risk. The room grew very still. My mother taught me how to be strong, she continued. But lately, she has taught me something even harder, how to remain open. Emotion rose gently in my chest. Arthur, she said, turning toward him, thank you for loving her with such steadiness. And thank you for being patient with a daughter who needed time to catch up with her mother's courage. Arthur inclined his head warmly. You are always worth the patience. Leela smiled, then lifted her glass. To love that refuses to expire, and to new beginnings, no matter when they arrive. To new beginnings, the guests echoed. I realized then that the fracture I had feared might split our family had instead widened our capacity to understand one another. Families do not remain strong by resisting change. They remain strong by learning how to stretch around it. That night, after the last guest departed and the garden lights dimmed, Arthur and I walked slowly along the stone path. The air carried a faint chill, the honest reminder of autumn. Are you happy? He asked. I considered the question carefully. Happiness, I have learned, is not constant brightness, it is quieter than that. Yes, I said, but more than happy, I feel at peace. He nodded, as though peace had been his hope all along. Before we reached the car, I looked back once more at the empty chairs beneath the arbor. For years, I had been certain my life's great love story belonged entirely to the past. Now I understood something essential. The heart is not a house with only one room. It is a landscape, capable of holding memory and possibility at the same time. Astrid would always be part of my story, the chapter that shaped me. Arthur was the chapter that reminded me the book was not finished. And Leela, she had become the bridge between who I had been and who I was still becoming. We have been married 3 years now. Our life is wonderfully ordinary: morning coffee, shared crossword puzzles, gentle debates about history versus literature. On Sundays, Leela and the boys come for dinner. Arthur lets them beat him shamelessly at board games, claiming it builds their confidence. Sometimes I catch Leela watching us with a small, thoughtful smile, as though she is still adjusting to the shape of this happiness but no longer fears it. Not long ago, she hugged me goodbye and whispered, I hope I'm this brave when I'm your age. I smiled. It isn't bravery alone, I told her. It's permission, the permission to keep living. So if you are listening to my story today, perhaps I will leave you with this gentle question. When life offers you a second chance at love, would you recognize it, or would you turn away because it arrived later than expected? We often speak about growing old as though it means growing finished, but the truth is far kinder. As long as your heart remains open, your story is still being written, and sometimes the most beautiful chapters are the ones you never planned. If this story touched you, if it reminded you that new beginnings are always possible, share it with someone who might need that hope today. And tell me, would you have had the courage to begin again at 65?